Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. I suspect that I have many views and social goals in common, but my introduction to Charlie Kirk from one of my listeners was on the topic of illegal drugs, something Kirk characterized himself as his most controversial take. Kirk made the case that President Trump should not reclassify marijuana, that's cannabis, from the most prohibited Scheduled I controlled substance to the least restricted category, Schedule III. Reclassification would not technically be true federal legalization, but it would be beneficial from a free market point of view in terms of less regulation, less taxation, and better for scientific research. To be in the most restrictive Schedule I category means that a drug has to be, 1, have a high potential for abuse, and 2, no accepted medical uses for treatment, and 3, no accepted safe uses, even under medical supervision. Now, marijuana or cannabis does not meet any of the requirements to be in the most restrictive Schedule I category. I believe any drug, including over-the-counter medications, is capable of contributing to abuse. But even a generous interpretation of the subjective term abuse would find that it occurs in only a small percentage of cases here and is often best considered a contributing factor. More on this issue of abuse later. Kirk relies on the concocted and thoroughly discredited gateway theory of drug abuse, something invented by a progressive propagandist in 1937 to stifle the scientific consensus before Congress. Briefly, the tremendous increase in illegal drug potency and the spread of even more dangerous and deadly illegal drugs is a policy-induced problem. I will leave links to a free copy of my 1991 book on this subject, as well as a shorter analysis of the subject of drug potency addressing alcohol prohibition in the 1920s. Now, cannabis, or marijuana, has accepted medical uses dating back before the time of the Bible, and in many civilizations, ancient and modern, and may actually have been an ingredient in holy anointing oil. It is currently legalized and in use as a medical treatment in many countries and in many U.S. states. Many Americans use and have benefited from cannabis to treat minor, major, or even fatal conditions. The vast majority of Americans support legalization for medical purposes. Americans are virtually unanimous that the medical professions should have the ability to use and prescribe cannabis for medical treatments. This despite an ever-increasing percentage of Americans who no longer completely trust state-approved medical professionals, knowing that they are being bought off by pharmaceutical and insurance industries while acting like sheep, conforming to every government dictate. Consequently, marijuana legalization has seen a big substitution away from government-sanctioned pharmaceutical drugs towards marijuana, with or without the psychoactive THC component. There is also some evidence some people substitute cannabis for alcohol and tobacco. These substitution effects are suggested by the data. It's something we would expect, as well as political donations made by these legal industries to prevent state cannabis legalization measures from passing. The prohibition of narcotics in 1914, the prohibition of alcohol in 1919, and the prohibition of cannabis in 1937 were all measures passed at the behest of the left-wing socialist progressive movements. All these prohibitions had to be craftily written and were barely able to pass by constitutional constraints. They were then implemented by progressives in government in blatant anti-constitutional fashion. Assigning cannabis to the difficult, rigorous Schedule I category is one of those progressive dodges of the U.S. Constitution. Now, Kirk believes that cannabis is bad for you, but especially for children, and I generally agree. But I think all drugs are potentially harmful and need to be used judiciously and responsibly. In support of his position, Kirk seems to be trotting out the old propaganda talking points of the Rocky Mountain high intensity drug trafficking area complot. A Bill Clinton and Barack Obama era propaganda outfit, I think it's now defunct. I caught those same Rocky Mountain high propagandists early on deliberately trying to mislead the public about the impact of cannabis legalization in Colorado, and the links are provided. I must say that I also share Kirk's abhorrence about our major cities, particularly in the West and Northeast, being overrun with freeloaders and derelicts. Bless their hearts. They represent the leading edge of the de-civilization that the state brings and leaves in its wake filth, indolence, and despair. I have written specifically and talked in the media about such problems in the wake of drug legalization in Portland. It's basically a problem of the permissive socialist mindset in politics and a lack of respect for private property. Now, even anarcho-capitalists, maybe especially so, recognize that public places, such as sidewalks and parks, are not free-for-alls. At a minimum, cities should mimic the types of restrictions that businesses and living communities impose on public spaces. And I provide the links here to the stuff I've done about the Portland problem. Most of all, Kirk should not be attacking business as some kind of prime culprit preying on children into addiction and idlest. That's nonsense. Business is precisely the institution in society that raises people up economically, encourages them to behave responsibly, and allows so many to thrive, not just with goods and services that they provide, but with the payrolls they provide and the good behavior that they demand. I'm going to provide a link here to a free copy of Ludwig von Mises's small book, The Anti-Capitalist Mentality. We need to attack the state for driving these bad behaviors. Of course, most importantly, we need to attack the government schools for not doing the job of education and for brainwashing children with Marxist and progressive ideology. They serve as a training ground for bad behavior and socialistic attitudes. We also need to attack bad parents for not raising their children properly and leaving them in substandard public government schools. Many of these bad parents are welfare bums, with almost 40% of Americans now heavily dependent on taxpayer handouts. More broadly and more directly, we should not be surprised by such personality disorders in a country with overly generous, wide-ranging, and never-ending welfare programs if you don't work. unemployment insurance, generous health benefits, and guaranteed retirement funds, etc. It's these progressive ideas that have put this country in such trouble, making Americans obese, lazy, and docile. Progressive ideas is also what created the awful and racist war on drugs in the first place. What worked for America is laissez-faire ideas, such as private property, limited government, and individual responsibility. Blaming derelict behavior and drug abuse on liberty rather than on the nanny state is a tribute to the success of the propaganda of progressivism and Marxism. And expecting drug warriors to solve these types of problems is pure delusion. Reclassifying cannabis would be a very minor step in the right direction.